And we're back, folks. Welcome to Soaring Profits. You guys all know this gentleman here beside me. That's James, our regular. But we've also got what appears to be another regular. We have Ross Campbell joined on Soaring Profits this evening. You folks know him from a few podcasts ago. He's back. That podcast that he was talking about when we were last chatting, it's now live. He's doing some amazing things. We're super glad to have you, Ross. Thank you for joining us this evening, sir.
It doesn't have to call me sir, but thank you. Thank you. It's
Perfect.
You make me feel so old. Listen, Patrick and James, I really enjoyed myself the last time I was here, the first time. So I'm delighted to be back. I'm really happy to be here. And thank you for inviting me.
Ross, we are so glad to have you. We were just kind of breaking into a little conversation here in kind of the back off-screen area of this. And we kind of looked at our watches like, wow, we're running super late, aren't we? We should probably jump on this. But that's what it is. That's what this whole concept is, folks. For you that have been following us for a while now, that's what Soaring Profits is. We try to bring great individuals, great people. Ross, you've been fantastic the last time we had you. I know we're super excited to talk about your new podcast. And I think, James, you've actually got a little bit of a sound bite of the current podcast and what Ross is doing.
Yeah, I have a clip about it, but I thought maybe we'll get Ross to explain what it is, and then we'll give a little clip. Go ahead.
Okay, James, let me tell you where it began. There's always a beginning for everything. Right. I was inspired by a young woman back in 2007 with a speech.
Aren't we all inspired?
That actually, yeah. She delivered a speech that won the World Championship of Public Speaking. Wow. Toastmasters World Champion. The title of her speech was Speak. Now, this person's name was LaShonda Rundles. Beautiful young lady. She had a 12-year-old son, and she also had lupus. And her prognosis was not good. So she knew she only had maybe weeks or months to live. Wow. So she wanted to leave her legacy in that speech called Speak. I was so moved by that speech that I just felt if I'm going to have a topic that I really want to focus in on, I want to focus in on leaving a legacy. As you saw, I wrote a book along with a colleague of mine called Leaving a Legacy, How to Write a Book of Your Own. That went over quite well. But then I got thinking, because I had a project to do for Toastmasters, which said, create a podcast and do it about something that you're passionate about. I said, you know what? I'm gonna do a podcast on leaving a written legacy. Why do it? How to do it? And really the purpose of it was to sow a seed in the minds of people who are listening that, hey, maybe I can leave a written legacy for my descendants, my family, my friends. So that was the genesis. And then I set about writing all these podcast episodes. I just want to share, I think what we should share tonight would be simply the opening for each of the podcasts. If you don't mind, James, just play that opening because I think it pretty much describes the podcast itself.
Okay. Just 1 second. Sorry.
My tech guy over here.
How's that?
It may be difficult to accept the fact that one day our voices will be silenced forever. But it's so good to know that our words and thoughts can live on forever when we leave a written legacy. Hi, my name is Ross Campbell. That's Campbell like the soup. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to Leaving a Written Legacy, How to Write a Book of Your Very Own. Thank you for joining me. Life is a journey, a fabulous trip around our planet that results in a plethora of stories, some uplifting.
Oh my God, I just want to keep listening to it. Sorry.
Thank you.
Ross, you have this silky butter voice that is just ridiculous, my friend. That is fantastic. I love it. Amazing.
It so reminds me, and we talked about this before, Ross. And that is the story, or whatever. What was that?
And that is the rest of the story.
The story.
That's right.
Oh my God! When you talk, that's who I think of every time.
Really? Well, you're talking about my hero. My absolute favorite broadcaster ever was Paul Harvey.
Yeah.
And he is the one that delivered the rest of the story.
Right.
I would listen to Paul Harvey late at night on ABC radio network, just barely picking it up on my car radio.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to hear, well, he told a story like no one else, but it was his finish. His signature was Paul Harvey.
Right.
Good night.
Yeah.
Wow. I just love that stuff.
But it did, and there was so much to it. And he would start with the story, and it'd be Wrigley's gum. The story of the founding of Wrigley's gum.
Yeah.
Something so innocuous.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden the story was when they were in a trench in Normandy, right? Whatever it was. And then they were hanging on it.
It was brilliant.
How is this going to end up at Wrigley's gum? I got nothing. And this complete circle around, and now you know.
He was my absolute favorite. And I think one of the things I loved about some of the old broadcasters, the Edward R. Murrow. I don't know if you've ever heard any of his reports from London during the war, but his reports were all ad lib,
really?
Off the cuff.
Yeah.
And they would begin with the sirens going in London when the bombings started.
Yeah.
And you could hear, and he would describe the puffs of the smoke of the flak guns and the bombers. And now they're releasing the bombs as they're flying over London. He was so eloquent. I don't think there's another broadcaster that has come even close to being that eloquent.
Yeah.
Under that kind of stress. He's being bombed.
Right.
He could articulate exactly and crystallize exactly what was happening at that moment.
I think the beauty of it is that radio people back then could paint a picture, and they could paint a beautiful picture. They didn't have to have any visuals or anything, and you could feel it, you could smell it, you could taste it. It was like you were there, and it was just beautiful. I loved every minute of it. I think we've lost that art now. Like, people don't know how to use their imaginations anymore.
I don't think they're taught it. One of the things I used to love to do when I was in radio, and I'll never forget working in Calgary at CFAC in Calgary, and I would work the 8 to midnight shift and then not be really in a hurry to get home. So let's go to the library and let's pull out some albums. And there was an album there of Edward R. Murrow's Reports from London. Mm-hmm. I would listen to those reports and think, if only I could do it a third as well as him, because they were riveting, absolutely captivating.
Yeah.
He was so good. So I think the new generation of broadcasters should have a mentor who has that kind of ability. Yeah. There aren't a lot. In fact, I don't think I really had a mentor. I listened to radio stations. My mentors were Paul Harvey, John Cameron Swayze, who had the greatest opening. How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? How do you do? This is John Cameron Swayze.
That's cool.
That's a signature.
Yeah, that triggers a memory. I don't know why, but I've heard that before.
Oh yeah, well, again, legendary broadcasters like Walter Cronkite and all those wonderful guys. We have some Canadian icons too. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So I talk about that in my other kind of videos that I do on Soaring Profits, and it's all about the people you have around you. And I say that sometimes the people you have around you are just literally watching videos of the people who have made it, and they break down how they make it, how they spend their morning. If you can, this is a person who's already doing what you want to do. Yeah. Listen to how he does his morning. And if you can listen to how he does his morning and modify it to your life, then you're going to make it. You just have to have those mentors like you're talking about.
You do.
That guide you, but they don't necessarily have to be standing beside you, like you said. It's just someone that you can image or imitate. You know.
Yes. I would, of course, I was a radio nut. When I was off shift, I'd go and find radio stations who I knew the announcers were great. In Boston, used to have WBC Boston, had a guy by the name of Juicy Brucey. And I couldn't wait to catch Juicy Brucey's show. There was Cousin Brucey on WABC New York, and I would listen to him. I got some tapes from KHJ in Los Angeles from the 60s. These DJs were phenomenal. Their morning man at KHJ was a guy by the name of Robert W. Morgan. Now, what has more rhythm than Robert W. Morgan?
Right.
KHJ. And there was the real Don Steele, crazy guy, was wonderful, frantic. I listened to those tapes for hours and hours and hours. I would try to emulate them. I would try to emulate their rhythm, how they would introduce a song, and not just say, now here is. I mean, you're right. Those were my mentors, Robert W. Morgan and Cousin Brucey, Juicy Brucey in Boston, WBZ.
Yeah, love it.
Listened to it all the time, loved it.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to get good at something.
I wonder, Ross, if that is a uniquely the last, let's call it 2 generations in human history. Because again, I think I look at that is that my father, for instance, he grew up, his dad died when he's a year and a half old. So for him to walk out into the world and kind of, compartmentalize what it was like to be a man, a father, that sort of thing. James got to know my dad fairly well there at the end of his life. And James, like you'd look at him, it's like John Wayne walking in the bar.
John Wayne. I remember the first time he rolled out of his truck.
Right.
Yeah. To bring Pat lunch. And he rolled out of his truck, and it was like John Wayne, just like the way he opened the door, the way his hat was tilted, the way his swung out like super slow, landed on the ground, and then he just had a swagger. And he just
you gotta love it. He had style.
But that was the thing. That was uniquely something that he patterned off of watching the media of the time, taking that, personifying that in and of himself. And for him, because he did, like, again, his father, he looked at men in the world around him. And going back, like, that is a uniquely media time, the technology that allows us to do this. Like, we briefly talked about this kind of in the backstage area, is that this technology has allowed us to kind of incorporate these men of mythic proportion, if you will.
Yeah.
And, a couple generations before that, there was nothing. You had the blacksmith in the town, you had the shopkeeper. Those are the people that you went to for that. And we this is a very unique thing. And while those things are very positive, I look at some of the people that are, the celebrities or the personas or of the last little while. And I go, I feel like we've come a long way since Paul Harvey. The things that we want our people to emulate have drastically pivoted from the fantastic storytelling, the era of, confidence in that. And it seems like as long as you know the newest TikTok dance, you're probably okay, right?
Yeah, right.
What does that mean? How does media pivot? How does it drive society? And that's where I wonder what the next stages are. What is the next iteration of all of this kind of following these mentors?
Well, we used to watch people who actually already had who they were. They knew who they were, who they wanted to be. They came up on stage and they were who they were. And now it seems like all our people who are popular are still finding themselves. They have no idea who they are. Like one day they're wearing something, and then the next day they're wearing something else. Their style constantly changes. The way they talk to people constantly changes. The amount of them that have nervous breakdowns or drug addictions and all that stuff that derails them, it would be hard to find a hero nowadays. Like the heroes.
I think so too. Listen, I think one of the things that, I do really admire the late night talk show guys. I think they're great, Jimmy Fallon and those folks. I find though that the topic, the politics of it, is extremely divisive, and I have really good friends who are Republicans. I have really good friends who are not Republicans. And it's too bad that it seems to be, I don't know, maybe they've always picked on politicians, but I don't think so. I look back in the Dean Martin days when he had his Dean Martin show, and
even Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, these
Letterman, Leno. Like, I was not a huge
Yeah.
Leno fan. I like more of a Letterman type style of humor.
Yeah.
Again, very different. The late night guys now, I can't watch.
Well, they are funny, but I think they are also very cruel in terms of how they describe politicians.
Yeah.
Look, I think we have a big enough crisis in the world of what we don't trust the politicians. We don't trust the government. I mean, that's a huge problem in the world.
Yeah.
And I just, we're not going to solve it, the three of us tonight. But I just wanted to make the point that I'd love to see a comedian come up and just leave the politics out of it. And let's talk about something that is really, really funny. And
Rosh, you're absolutely right. It's one of those situations that, you go to a comic show. You're sitting in a bar and you got a live comic.
Yeah.
The tiptoe around the images, the things that are just completely offline. That's what made the 90s and 2000s comedians what they were. Because nothing was off the table. We'll hit you, we'll run back. We'll hit you, we'll run back. We'll hit you. But now it's like we're the woke, whatever that means to everybody in their own way. Yeah. But you can't say anything or you're going to offend somebody. So it's like it can only be political commentary because it's the only thing that they're all assholes, so it's fine.
Everyone can make fun of them.
It's just not very healthy for the country.
No, I used to go to these shows like late night and the comedy shows to escape the real world. Yeah. And now it's like every time it's division. You should hate this person because of this. Well, that's not funny comedy. I don't want to hear that. Right. I don't want to hear
I think it's a shame that we don't have Bill Cosby, Bill Cosby. The early Bill Cosby was absolutely incredibly funny. Yeah. And I bought his albums and I just listened to him, roared with them. I never heard them. I thought it was just wonderful. But I'm not sure. I don't even know of any comedian today that I would say, oh, I really like to go and hear them. Do you know anybody?
Nope.
No, I don't either.
At all. Yeah.
No. I mean, thank goodness there's music and that we can go and hear a wonderful artist and still be, taken away to La La Land just with the music.
I don't know if you've been watching, but at concerts now, they'll stop there in the middle of their song and they'll say Trump sucks and they do all this political stuff.
I know
in the middle of the concert, or abortion and all these things. It's like, well, I get that stuff's important. I understand that you have a platform and you want to share it, but that's not why we're here. We're here to have a good time and enjoy music and
let's bring on the Stones and let's bring on some music that is really, really hard driving rock. And that's what I like anyway. I love country music too. I think country is less political. At least what I've noticed. I haven't seen.
I think that the politics of country, I would argue, in the last couple of years have started. I'll go back to say the Dixie Chicks. So
that may be where it began.
Right, and
because Bush people were not happy with her. That's right.
Yeah, so that goes back to the Iraq War and all that.
Yeah, that's right.
And recently, after the George Floyd stuff, they removed the name of Dixie from. They're just the Chicks.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So that again, a lot
that's how out of it I am now. Okay.
Well, that's the thing, right? I hate to say it, but you can't keep up with it all.
No.
And then so now with all of that, the entertainment juggernaut of news, what it is, the last 2 weeks that we've had here, with the Queen dying and every little look, every side little gesture, what they were wearing was a slight to the Queen,
He held the hand. He didn't hold the hand. He wasn't allowed to wear the uniform. She took the flowers and held on to them instead of passing us. Like, it was just ridiculous.
But don't you think, guys, that is really a product of 24-hour news networks, whether it's CNN or Fox or whether it's CBC News Network, CTV? There's tons of. Back in the 60s, we didn't have 24. We didn't have cable.
Right.
So there were no cable stations. There were no 24-hour news networks, and having to fill all that time. Now, I think Mr. Trump has given the pundits a lot to work with because he is certainly different.
But I think, Ross, you're bang on. When you have that 24-hour news cycle, and all of a sudden you need information to fill that. But you got to remember, that's from like mid 90s.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
We're 20 some years into this experiment.
Yeah,
And,
right.
and, you know, I look at, I've got family in the States, you know, my
Yeah.
family from Ireland started in the States, then came to Canada. So, you know, I got a fond place for the United States in my heart. The United States is kind of this big grand experiment that if they can keep going, governance by the people for the people. That is the great experiment in politics.
Right.
We've got 20 years of 24-hour news cycle, and we're kind of at that point where it feels we might not make another 100 years on this experiment, right?
Oh, I know.
So,
It's vicious. The politics is vicious, and so is the reporting.
Yes.
And it is biased, and they're certainly going to be on both sides, on every side.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to filter that stuff out and what is true and what isn't true. And I think that the media people of tomorrow are going to have an interesting challenge, but it's going to be so wonderful to see it evolve, because it's all evolution. I mean, when I look back, when I started out in radio, I was 18 years old. And when I was so bad. I mean, I was amazed that I had a job. I got paid. But I worked at it. You know, we evolve. We listen to guys. We emulate people we want to be like. And I think the whole world is evolving. So
well, I think you're exactly right, Ross. And this is where exactly what this spurred this podcast. And exactly, it seems like what you're doing now is this the next iteration of, okay, so 24-hour on-demand information at your fingertips at all times. Yeah. Now you're in a situation like we are, is we're trying to put out some content. And it sounds like from everything you've talked to us before about your background, your viewpoint on life, I would argue, you know, like I said, I always enjoy having you on because we have these types of conversations. We can be all over the map, but you come with it kind of as a gentleman, a scholar, and you come with it in a viewpoint that is just, I think it's fantastic because you don't get to sit down with people like you on a daily basis. So the podcast that you've put together now is about how to build that. Take what you've had in your life. I'm sure you've mentored. You've got children, obviously. You've mentored. You've had mentors, and they've now boiled down to something that you're building in this podcast.
I'm hoping. You know, I think podcasts and our lives are all evolutionary, and you know, whether or not this Leaving a Written Legacy podcast lives for any length of time or not is to be seen. I don't know, but I do know that it's not the end. It is something that I'm really fascinated by, and I'd like to see if an audience can be built.
For sure.
And really, if I could get into the living rooms of people and who share my real passion for, I like to write. And I think you guys do too. You have to be writers. And I love to see the works of people who have taken the time to journal their life, journal their days, and say, oh, here's what I did today. Oh, and here's somebody I ran into. Funny thing. I like to do that. I think I told you, and I shared this that I'm now living in a retirement home. We used to call them old folks homes.
Right. Yeah.
And they still are old folks homes.
Other young man homes.
But I'm here because my wife's health, and we need nursing care. But I'm also meeting some fascinating people in their late 80s and 90s who have wonderful stories. And one man in particular, 97 years old, 2 years ago, his daughter said, "Hey, Dad, you've got to write down the stories you've been telling us when we were children. We just want to have that for our children's children's children." So at the age of 95, he wrote down 90 pages worth of stories. And his daughter put it into a book with a photograph of their dad and mom when they were married. And to see him when he was like 23 and now he's 97. But the stories are so gripping. One story was about a time, he was a very senior executive with General Electric, which was here in Peterborough, as you know. And he traveled throughout the world to sell huge equipment, electrical equipment. In one country, which will go unnamed, they were approached by someone who said they would guarantee they get the contract, but they'd have to pay him $200,000. The contract would have been worth $100 million.
Right.
But they said, no, we're not going to get bribed. And you know what they did? They pulled up stakes, came back to Peterborough and said, forget it.
Wow.
We're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Now that is honor.
Yeah.
That is integrity.
Yeah.
Those are the stories that I think should live on and can. You know, long after our voices are silenced, our words can still.
Yeah.
No, Ross, exactly. I think it's a great, an absolutely pinpoint story of what we were talking about earlier with, you know, we talk about politics and there's just this general, you know, hatred for these people. And it's because all we hear is that, you know, the CEO of X, Y, and Z company is chasing the almighty dollar. They're cutting 300 jobs here. They're cutting this, they're cutting that, they're doing this. So when you have someone like that, who 97 years ago, you would have seen things.
Oh, yeah.
Right? To where we are today, again, and we've just relived this with the Queen going through her era.
Amazing.
97 years to have that story. I wish that I had ran into you a couple years ago, and especially just before the passing of my father, because this is something that I wanted to do with him. And unfortunately, he was just too unwell at the end. And we had talked about doing it like a video type kind of thing, but it was, I never pushed it because I thought to myself, it would be pretty hard for a man at the end of his life to sit down and do this. Whereas it sounds like you're doing, you know, hey, let's take a more proactive approach to this. Let's do this while we're in, you know, our prime, have these conversations, write down these legacy stories. So, because I would love nothing more than be able to sit down at night and be able to roll through a story or a little something, an innuendo that my father would do, and relive that. And that's very powerful for the next generation, right?
Oh, absolutely. And also, it's a perspective on history. Because even your life too matters, and what you did and how you handled COVID. I think in one of my first episode, I do talk about why leave a written legacy. And one of the whys is not just to write it about you, but you could also write it about someone who inspired you, who you really admired. And I do talk about the fact that my nephew wrote a book about his father, and it's called My Father Found Faithful. And it chronicles his father's life. A poor farmer boy in Saskatchewan, became a minister, and then, you know, how he raised his family and how he inspired his kids.
I love it.
Wonderful book. And Patrick, I'm not going to put you on the spot. Yes, I am. Patrick, think about articulating your father's story the way you saw your father, how he affected you, how he inspired you.
For sure.
Because that would make a wonderful legacy book too.
Right.
It doesn't have to be just about you.
Right. And I never thought of it, Ross, is that I think there's a lot of something there too. And especially going through the process of grieving a loss of a loved one and that sort of thing. I think all too often we don't do that. I know that there's a lot of stuff in my possession, in my garage right now where I'm looking at, it's like, that couch will never probably enter my house, but I can't throw it away. Right. Like I've got all kinds of stuff that I just will never be able to get rid of. Because it was his. It was literally him in those things. And my father was a horseman. He was an excellent horse trainer. Again, probably going back from the John Wayne type thing.
Right, yeah.
I'm going through books the other day as I'm starting to slowly clean stuff up. And I'm going through books, and he's horse training journals. And there's like the margins are full. And they're stories of how to train a horse, but also relating to man. And how to create like relationships with people and in business and all that stuff. And I'm looking at them, and it pops off the page, my father. And like I was saying, is to have something like what you're building and instructing. He did that on a Tuesday afternoon, maybe having a beer by the pool.
Yeah, that's right.
Have structure and be able to derive that and build that going forward. I think that is an invaluable item. That it offers such an awesome opportunity for the next generation, for yourself, even like to be able to look back. Amazing. Yeah, I think that's
it's funny how things roll, especially with our podcast here, because 2 weeks ago we had the wonderful Wendy, a really good dear friend of mine, and she has written a couple of stories, but one of the ones that she wrote about was the person who inspired her, which was her grandma, and just how wonderful her grandma was and all that stuff. And so she wrote about it, and it's in a collaborative book. And she was very excited about it. And then last week we had this woman called Allison, and she's a ghostwriter. And what she does is literally what you're saying. she would take Pat and talk to him about his dad, and she and he would write about his dad together, and she would get money for it, and then she just disappears from it. She doesn't even put her name on it. It's just wonderful. And now you're talking about leaving a legacy, and you know what? Like, I remember when my father passed away, and I was going through his stuff, and same as you, Pat. Like, there was a lot of stuff that I held on. Gosh, 20 years I kept it because I didn't know what to do with it. It was in the way. But I remember when he first died, and I was sifting through his stuff, just craving for like a piece of writing or a letter or just something that I could connect with. And unfortunately, he wasn't that guy, and he didn't have anything. So for you to have those margins, man, that's freaking beautiful. And that's something you need. That I agree with Ross here. Like, if you go back to the stories you told me about the union days, even that would be a glorious, like, so back in the union days when his dad was at GE, there's a few like great bravado stories.
I'll bet, eh?
The gentleman that you live with, Ross, he might remember my dad's name. We'll just leave it at that.
Okay, sure. Well, look, I think the legacy idea was, I got to give my father credit, because he was the first in our family to actually write a book about his life, and about, it's a fascinating book. And it's got pictures in it. It's got pictures of him and my mom during their wedding, and posing beside this Model T in the wintertime. And it's just the old, the 1930s outfits that they wore. Just an incredible book. But he kept a journal every day. And right up until he started in 1930, keeping a journal. And his last entry was 1984. He died in 1993. But I went through his scribblers. He had tons of scribblers, because these weren't fancy books. He just wrote stuff down as he saw it. He often talked about what he had for dinner, and whether mother was mad at him about something. And so, but I went through all of these things, and like your father, Patrick, my dad also kept things in the margin. In his Bible, he had how that relates. And so I was able to glean a lot of those things. He loved quotes. And I love quotes. As you probably don't know that yet, but this is a big hobby of mine. I save quotes. I've got thousands of them. That's cool. And I find them so inspiring.
For sure. Well, I think, like you say, is that there's something that can be gleaned from something. Like when you put that quote out there, the initial author of it, the initial person that says it in a certain way, and whatever they mean by it. But how you internalize that as the individual yourself, and the whole meaning you derive from it, can be very, come from something very innocuous to something that is incredibly powerful, and can literally become a stake that people turn their lives and focus on. And that written word, that verbalization, that ability to be able to dive deeper into somebody and someone's story and who they are as an innate human, I think that's amazingly powerful. And I don't think enough people in this world, we're worried about the TikTok dances and that 30 gratification. Yeah.
Did I ever tell you the story about? I'm a Toastmaster, and so folks in my clubs are really great keener. They're keen to do all kinds of great things. An amazing organization. I'd love you guys to check it out one day.
Love to.
I was at a Toastmasters convention once, and I was at a workshop. They have workshops during the conferences, and this workshop was about writing a book of your own. And I thought, oh, this is gonna be cool. And they said, how many of you would like to write a book of your own? Almost every hand went up.
Yeah.
And so, we all want to do it. Then, I don't know, maybe 20 years later, I'm at an RV park in Fort Myers, Florida, and I had written this book with Judy Suk called, Leaving a Legacy. And I gave a copy to the activities director at the RV park. And she said, hey, how would you like to come and talk to the folks on Monday? We have all these people coming in. We have Monday morning coffee time. And I said, oh, yeah, sure, I'll do that. No problem. So I made the classic error, not knowing what the response would be. And I opened up with the same line that the guy did back at the Toastmasters workshop. I said, how many of you here have ever thought about writing a book? Dead silence.
Crickets.
No, you're.
Two hands went up.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh
Uh-oh.
boy, are you ever going to enjoy the next 20 minutes?
Yeah, that's wild. Eh?
I
Yeah.
don't think very many people want to. And these are retired folks. They got nothing else to do, but they drink at happy hour and they just never sober up, I guess.
But I think just the thought of writing a book, I think everyone has probably tried writing at some point in time, whether it was for high school or
Yeah.
just life. I know I've started, I don't know, 10 different books and never stayed to it, because you always get to that point where you're like, I don't know what else to write.
I don't know where I'm going with this.
I don't know where I'm going with this. I don't know where, and you get to that block, and instead of like moving forward, maybe looking at another book, finding some other, you just put it away. And I think that by the time I get to 80 and someone comes up to me and goes, does anyone here want to write a book? I'd be like, hell no, I don't want to write a book.
That's right.
I don't want to look at a book right now. I just
You
want
know what
to
I think would be great? I think I would love to have a workshop. I'd like to put on a workshop, but it would be week long. And at the beginning of the week, we start with the whys and then come up with the concepts.
Yeah.
And by the end of that week, we're ready to publish.
Yeah.
The weekend's not long enough. You need
Ross,
at
I think
least a
you
week.
have something. I think innately you would be able to have a target there of people that would love that.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that, one of the authors, and his name, the book is The 4-Hour Work Week.
Yes.
Timothy Ferriss.
Yeah.
So a book that I've loved and have modeled a lot of my business stuff after.
Mhm.
That's what he started with when he was in university. He's like, I'm not going to get a bartending job and make $10 an hour and hope that people tip me. He goes,
Right.
I'm going to make a course, and that's what I'm going to do. So he's like, how to write faster, type faster, do papers faster. That's what he did the course on. And it was like $100 course. He had 5 people, it's $500.
That's
And
right.
that's what he did. And he made a ton of money off of these course options. And because people are like, I can better myself, I can get that image, I can get that brand, right? That's something I can buy into.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is to be able to do that week-long seminar.
That's what it would be.
I think it's a very interesting opportunity that would allow people to deep dive, but not flounder into a new world of options.
Yeah. But have a very serious activity quota, daily activities. I mean, it's all about getting things done. It's not that the finished product will come, but you have to follow a certain pattern of activities to get there. And so I think a week would be great. I would want to have sponsors, like somebody who's printing books to come along to be a sponsor. And maybe a graphic artist would also be able to provide some really interesting covers for the books. Yep. I'd like to do that, and we'll see. Maybe that'll happen. You know?
That would be great. I think it would be phenomenal and something I'd be interested in for sure.
Is it really? Well, then maybe I'll sign you up then, James.
You'll
be my
the
first
credit
two guys.
card information for him there, James. He'll just make sure that gets set for you. But he needs the 3 digits on the back, eh?
I'll just give it to you right now.
Yeah.
Everyone at the profiteers, get your pens ready.
Well, we had a fantastic.
Her
name is slipping my mind. Last week, the ghostwriter.
Allison.
Allison, right. So Allison last week, Ross, I know that, we've had some interesting people on here.
What?
We had someone from Houston, Texas reach out to us.
Really?
She lived in, it's not, where was it? Zambia?
Oh, that's
Tanzania.
Tanzania. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
She was a missionary in Tanzania, came back to Houston, Texas, and has now been ghostwriting, has been doing this for the last couple of years. And the ability for her, even just in the hour-long conversation that we had, to explain taking somebody's motivation, sitting down. She said she's worked from, pastors, coming up with individual works for themselves to, fiction, nonfiction, works of, political stuff, campaigns. It's been a very interesting process for her. And she came from the medical field. So, so she would be like what we would call here in Canada, like a nurse practitioner. And she more or less walked away from the medical community and was like, I'm good. I did my little thing in Tanzania, helped a lot of people over there. What was it? She was stranded in Tanzania for 3 or 4 months, 5 months, I think is what it was.
during COVID.
During COVID.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I can think of better places to be stuck.
Me too.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Like that.
So
So
she was super interesting, and it just like, because she talked about you have to know, you have to be empathetic, and you have to be able to understand a person's psychology. So her medical field helped her in that way to understand the psychology of someone,
Right.
so that she could draw it out for him. Because, as you know, you have to have a voice. Anytime you read a really good, strong book, there's a voice in it, right?
Mhm.
So you can't just write down Billy went to the store and he bought a 6-shooter. There
That's
has
right.
to be a voice behind it, and for someone else to write in your voice, you have to really understand it. And that was kind of her journey, that she went from the medical field where she understood all of that, and then brought it into the writing. I just thought it was fascinating, because I love it.
It would be.
Yeah.
My brother wrote a book with a ghostwriter as such, but not really so much of a ghost, because he revealed who he was. He was actually a journalist with the Los Angeles Times.
Oh,
He was, and he good friends of my brother's, and also a motorsports reporter. And Rod was a major player in the Formula One world and the racing world.
Wow.
So he was a perfect guy to help him write the book.
Right.
And one of these, I have it on my website. You can see the photo of my brother's book. It's called "I'm Rod, an Incorrigible Optimist." If you go to my website at www.leavingawrittenlegacy.com,
you're doing it,
you'll see all the books I talk about in my podcast.
Yeah. I've been putting your books.
Can I repeat that?
Instagram and TikTok.
Yes.
And so the Profiteers might have already seen some of your books, because I have put the covers up on TikTok and Instagram.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well,
so it's very interesting. Yeah, no, that's really. So your brother wrote a book, and what was the book about?
It was a book. It was about his life, and basically it's 380 pages long. It's big. It's got a lot of color pictures in it, and it's a historical book also. Oh, okay. There's my logo. Yeah. He got fascinated with motorsports when he was in Germany. He was taking broadcasting course in New York, and was drafted into the Army, and said, "I better go, because if I don't, then I'm not going to be able to work in the States." And he knew he'd want to work in the United States at some point. So anyway, the first person he met
I just want to pause there. Why? Because people wouldn't understand that. Why wouldn't he be able to work in the United States if he didn't join the Army?
If he didn't accept the draft? Well, he wasn't sure, but he was told that he wouldn't be able to. There, by the way, is the picture of the young man, 97-year-old, that wrote the book.
Wow.
Edgar McClellan, great guy, 97 years old. Yeah. Wonderful stories. But anyway, Rod's book really chronicles his life, is not just his motorsports, but his fact that he grew up in Edmonton. He always had a passion to get rich, and that was his dream. I'm going to get rich, and he did. He achieved his dreams. But fascinating. The one here, My Dad Found Faithful, is the one my nephew wrote about his father. He's my brother-in-law. So these are interesting books. My sister Eveline, story behind my sister Eveline's book is very, very small. She had written a manuscript and sent it to me, and asked me to publish it, and I said I would. And then by the time I looked at the manuscript, I had a chance to read it over, got back to her, my sister passed away. So after she died, I went ahead and published it anyway, because I wanted everybody in our family to have a copy. That's her legacy book. The one just below that is about my brother. This is Rod. I'm Rod, an Incorrigible Optimist.
Nice.
But he certainly had style. This is the guy that said, "Image is everything."
Yeah. And the smile, he's got the glasses. He is a handsome-looking fella sitting there. It looks good.
Yeah. The fancy watch and everything. Yeah.
He certainly had style. That's for sure. He was a wonderful brother. Yeah. So,
and sorry, has he passed away?
He passed away in the end of March of 2020, and COVID had just really kicked in. Yeah. And in February, he had called me to tell me that he had been diagnosed with cancer, and it was terminal, and he was not going to take any kind of chemotherapy. He said, "I want chemo." I says, "What? I don't want chemo." He said, "I'm 88 years old. I've lived a great life. I don't want to expend it to get an extra 3 months of life. Forget it.
Right.
And so we all talk to him every day on FaceTime. Till the day he passed. And wonderful, wonderful legacy. Just
now, where was he out of? Did you say he was out of California?
Yes, they lived in Malibu for a long time, and Santa Barbara, and Pacific Palisades. And
Beautiful.
I think he was living in Pacific Palisades when he passed away.
Yeah.
But we sure miss him. He was,
now his family and everything is still down there, or did they?
Yes, his my sister-in-law, his wife, and their 2 daughters are still in California. And my one niece, my brother's youngest daughter, Heather, is a real estate agent. She's married to a chap who was a driver, an IndyCar driver, by the name of Townsend Bell. And Townsend is currently one of the broadcasters on NBC's motorsports television. It is,
no way.
Yeah. So it kind of stayed in the family.
Yeah.
Heather never wanted to marry anybody in racing. She'd be too nervous. But she met Townsend, of course, very handsome guy, just charming as all get out. And she married him, and they have 2 beautiful sons.
And he was leaving racing, going to broadcasting, so that's okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
And their oldest son, his name is Jackson Bell. He is in NASCAR racing.
Really?
Imagine that. He said, "I don't want to go to college." Grandpa didn't go to college, and look how well he did. So I don't want to go to college. And he went to work for a NASCAR team in North Carolina. So he'll do well. He's a really great kid. Great.
Well, and Ross, I think it goes back to everything that you and your family, it appears like, have built over the years. Is that, and you probably go back to your mother and your father. It sounds like your father as a pastor was a strong, patriarchal leader in the community. And he pushed that onto you, and he pushed that onto your brother, and he pushed that onto your sister. And then you folks went and you spawned and earned that within your own communities, and you dropped that to your children. And I think that's where, when you have that strength, and I've talked, the profiteers who follow us here, obviously we've talked a little bit about my father passing and the legacy that he left for me, but also his father and his older brother. He had an older brother who passed away was 8 years older and passed away 8 months before my dad did. His brother was of fairly decent health. Everything was fine. Everything was going well. And when my dad told him that he had stage 4 terminal cancer, he was dead within 2 months.
No.
And it was just a situation where they talked every day, I think, in a lot of ways. And our family's quite convinced that he died of a broken heart. He wasn't going to let his little brother go before him. And that speaks volumes to the way that my family structure is, and our drive and our way of working together and that sort of thing. So no, I think if you have and again, mentor, all that, when you have those strong people in your life, it's easy to kind of look at and use that as a platform for jumping off for that next generation. And I talk a ton about generational wealth building, generational planning. What are you doing? How are you helping your children? There's no point having them and screwing them around.
No.
Right. Give them
no, you're absolutely right. I'm glad you're doing that, Patrick. That's wonderful. I tried. I think my boys, they're both really doing well, and I'm so proud of them both.
Right.
Now they've had young people problems too, and we've had to go through the grim years. But right now they're just wonderful adult boys and men, and I'm very proud of them. I talked about my oldest son, Jason, who is in charge of the auto show. And my youngest son, Chad, he has an entrepreneurial spirit. He just opened up his own taco truck. He bought a food truck. He's selling tacos. And he jazzed up his. I got to send you a picture of his truck. It's really cool. Now I love tacos. I don't know about you guys, but
I had tacos for dinner.
Oh, really? Oh, my.
That's perfect.
Listen, he found, here's an interesting story that it goes way back, probably 30 years ago. My sister, Eveline, I showed you that little book that she passed away. Eveline, every winter, and she and her husband, Jim, would go down to Arizona. And besides playing golf and doing the wonderful things that people do in RV parks, she taught English to some Mexican ladies. And a Mexican lady really took a shine to Eveline, and she was so grateful for the English lessons that she gave her the family recipe for taco shells. I had never tasted tacos until probably 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was at Eveline's house and she said, "Hey, Ross, have you ever had tacos?" I said, "Never." She said, "I'm going to make you some." They were unbelievably fabulous. When Chad and his wife Monica came to the cottage and says, "Hey, listen, we're thinking about opening up a taco truck," I said, "Oh, that's great." They said, "We're going to just cook some up for you this weekend and see what you think of them." I said, "Okay, good." So they did their shells and they weren't happy with them. And I said, "Your Aunt Eveline, she had a special recipe from Mexico, Mexican family. So why don't you try them?" They built them. Wow, these are good. Anyway, his taco truck is in London, and apparently they just had a phenomenal second weekend of business. And I am so thrilled because he's talked about this for years.
Yeah. So how did this all come? Like, I know you're probably getting, we got to get them on, Ross. That's how this works.
That's right. You got to talk to Chad. You got to talk to Chad.
Yeah, sorry, both of them. It sounds like one's created a wonderful taco business from the ground floor up. That's part of your family legacy. And the other one has been in, you said NASCAR and
the Toronto Auto Show.
Yep. Yeah. So anyway, there you go. Two potential. They're probably watching this right now as we speak, and they'd be saying, "Dad, why are you doing this?" I think that they would benefit from just getting on and talking about it. But again, we are quite an entrepreneurial family. When my oldest son was, I think, 6 or 7, I said, and he wanted some money. I said, "Well, Jason, you got to get out and make some money. Get a paper route.
Get a haircut."
He said, "Okay, I can do that." But Dad, what else? He said, "I used to love to make popcorn." So I said, "Dad, why don't you make popcorn? Put them in little bags. I'll go down the street and sell them in the back of my wagon." I said, "Okay, fine." 10 cents a bag of popcorn. And I cook up a huge batch of popcorn, put butter on them and put salt on them, and then put them in little baggies and tie them up. And then he'd have maybe 30 bags of this popcorn. And he'd head down the street selling them door to door.
Awesome.
Completely sold out. And of course, I was getting to the point. I said, "Okay, Chase, I think I'm a little sick of making too much popcorn here." But that was the beginning of the entrepreneurial spirit that I like to encourage. And I think that's what our jobs are as parents and as grandfather. I want to encourage. I want to be an encourager. I'm not going to be necessarily your greatest inspiration, but if I can encourage you to be all you can be, and it's amazing how much you can do when you just set your mind to it. Then I think that's my function. That's what I should be doing.
I 100% agree. As a father, my job is to guide, not like point direct, because I don't know what my children are going to become ever. No. But when they come to me with problems, all I can do is say, "Okay, well, my life experience is this, and this is what I think are your possible outcomes. Here are 3 different ways you could go." And you have one, so make a choice. This is how we're supposed to go. But getting back to the popcorn thing, so Pat, what was that? Grade 6 with the slime, your daughter?
Grade 5, I think. Yeah. So back in the day, Ross, I don't even know if you'd know what this is, but there was a big era for about 3 or 4 years there where all these kids were into basically like glorified Play-Doh.
Oh yeah.
They called it slime.
Yeah.
And my daughter, she loved it. She was crazy about it, all these sorts of things. So I'm like, "Great. What do you need to make it?" So I went out and I bought all the stuff. And she's like, "This is amazing." Like, sit down.
Isn't that cool?
Like, why? I'm like, "We're going to make a shit ton of this stuff."
That's right.
She's not into slime anymore.
That's right. I know.
No, she ended up going to a craft show and she was bottling it up in like little mason jars. Yeah. And she was selling it. And again, the demographic of a craft show is all these, little older ladies who came along and they looked at this 8-7-year-old little girl and were like, "Take my money." So she sold a shit ton of this stuff. The garbage cans were likely full of it all when they were leaving. But it was like the little kid at the lemonade stand.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
right. Oh, you got to support him.
You are the first mover. Yeah. You are the individual in this that is the different than somebody else. And people will come and look at you and talk to you, and you're gonna go, "I make slime." That's the point of differentiation. Welcome to the business world.
Yeah, that's right. That's
she did very well. And now I can't remember if when you were here before. My daughter, so she was a competitive gymnast, and then she transitioned that this summer into about a 30-hour-a-week job. So she's been working all summer long. She gets her first paycheck, and it's like, well, it's sure shit a lot more than my first paycheck was. It's wild. But that's the thing. She's got, about 18 or 1900 bucks sitting in a bank account now after a nice little summer that she did. And she's like, this is work.
Yeah, I know.
You guys keep telling me that work's going to be hard. Doing
it is if you work for a jerk.
That's it.
Or you choose to do something you don't like. You get stuck in something you don't like. I talk about that a lot, that a lot of times you get stuck in what you don't like, and you think that you're trapped there. You think that you can't leave it. You can't move on. You can't go somewhere else. You can't change it because you convince yourself of that, especially when you have like people depending on you and children. And so you kind of get stuck in it. And that's when work sucks. I was fortunate that my jobs before, I loved them. They were great. I got to work with kids, autism, Down syndrome, stuff like that, and really help out some children and some parents. And so it was very, very fulfilling for me to do this stuff. It wasn't a lot of money. It wasn't making money, but it was very fulfilling. And to watch others that are, maybe going to like to work at building cars all day, and they put in the same widget nonstop. But I've talked about this. So they start getting that $80,000 a year. And instead of investing it, making a better future, saying, I'm going to build a business, I'm going to buy a property, they buy the jet ski, the $80,000 truck, they go on 14,000 trips, and then they're trapped. And that's the trap right there, because you can't get out of that. Once you start buying stuff, you overextend, right, Pat?
100%. And it's funny, Ross, someone like yourself, I would love to sit down one day and talk, the finances of growing up and raising a family and planning for retirement and all that sort of thing. Because I think that it's something that generationally we have not done necessarily super well. A lot of people had the pensions, whether, my father from General Electric, my mother was a nurse. I've watched them live their life relatively paycheck to paycheck, even as business owners outside of that, because they did some of those good things that they should have done. But now where they are is they're paycheck to paycheck with a little nest egg, right? And it's like where I think we're looking at, the recessionary process we're going through right now, whether it's just going to be a brief recession, a good recession, or worse, right? Some of those little nest eggs, there's a very good chance a lot that could evaporate very quickly. So like when my daughter comes along, 15 years from now, when she's, 26, 27, 28 years old, for her to walk out and look to buy a property and look at it like, Ross, when you were on here the first time, we talked about what you bought your first home for.
Yes.
Right.
That's
and
right.
Then the evaluation that would be now. So let's take that 15 years for my daughter to walk into the home ownership realm, and it's going to be unobtainable.
Yeah.
Right.
So it is, unless they prepare for it. But you know what? The honest truth is that, okay, I think I told you how much money I was making. Didn't I tell you that? Like $300 a month.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I graduated up to $12,000 a year. And I would say I'm now starving on the wage I was dreaming about earning. 12 grand a year. Now they're making 12 grand a month.
Right.
But I think it's usually pretty relative. I think there were always people who just refused to invest in things. And where they are now, unfortunately, they're sitting in hospitals waiting to be placed in government institutions because they can't afford to go to a really nice place. So I think it's wonderful the work that you guys do in encouraging people to be more, do more, not just for greed, but to do it because it's what you should do. It's the proper thing to do. Help people help themselves, and frankly, you're filling a void even by having a program like this. So this is great, gentlemen. Our hour is up. And you know what happens when I turn into a mouse? I
love it. I love it.
No.
Ross, send us off. Give us a little more about the podcast. Where can we find you? I can see on your site here. I'm going to pull that back up because it looks like you've got you have a few sessions there ready to go.
Okay, I have launched the third one. There's a total of six, a series of six podcasts,
That's it.
beginning with why write a podcast. Secondly, what should you include in your podcast? The third thing is let's start writing the podcast. Let's just what should we let's get going and budgeting time to write the podcast. Fourth is we get it down to the nitty gritty to edit. Have someone help you edit. Share it with someone who encourages you. Do not show your story to somebody who is a fire hose, someone who's going to rain on your parade, somebody who supports you, who encourages you. Share it with them. Get them to help you edit it for accuracy. Third, get it published. Get it printed. Doesn't have to be done by a big publishing company. You can there are several online printers that can print on demand, and it's very, very inexpensive. And then the final thing is, now that you got your book in your hot little hand, and wow, that's a great feeling. Yeah. If you've never had a book, and when you write your book and you see it and you touch it and you open it up and say, I did this, then you may want to promote it.
Right.
Because people should know about it. They should know about what wisdom you learned, what you gleaned from life, and how you got through the dark days. We all have dark days. We all have gravel roads we have to cover. It's not always a smooth highway. Absolutely. So that's the beginning to end, the alpha and the omega. That's what it is. And when it all is ending in the middle of October, late October, then I'm going to add something to it. And I think I'm going to start trying to find somebody to join me in person with a weekly workshop.
That's fantastic.
That's where it ends. I want to leave you with one bit of wisdom. You guys have your own ending. I better save this.
No,
that was our next thing. We always have our guests sign off, so I think it works out perfectly. And we always give them the last word, so you know how that works.
I'll wait for the last word then.
Perfect. Okay. James Powell, as always, thank you so much, Ross.
My pleasure.
It's fantastic to have you. You bring a very inspirational tone to our podcast. We appreciate having you. I know the Profiteers love hearing from you, so we will definitely get you back on again. And now we're going to have to make it a family event because I'm going to go to London. We're going to have some tacos.
Oh, yeah.
My daughter, she's trying it for the local AAA volleyball team here this week. So I imagine I will be down in London a lot.
Good for you.
I got a hot spot to eat. We should be good.
Yeah, for sure.
As always, folks, thank you very much. Thanks, Soaring Profits and all the profiteers out there. And let's make some money together, folks. Thanks again.
Pat, as always, brother, it's always amazing having you on. Always a pleasure, Ross. Every time when you say it's time to go, it just breaks my heart a little bit because I just love listening to your stories and how engaged you are and how sweet you are to us, like lifting us up every time. Every time you come on, you tell us how wonderful you are. You're so kind. And I hope people go and listen to these podcasts because I tell you, they're beautiful. Just listening to his voice is cream. But the information that he's given you, I'm telling you right now, if I had a book in my dad's voice about who he was, how he owned a store, how he drove a stock car, I don't know anything about it. It's just stuff that his friends told me, little snippets. And if I had his full story, it would change my life and who I am today. So what you're doing, Ross, is God's work, and I am so happy to have you on. We're going to have you on again because I don't think we can ever get to the end of this story. The end of Ross, it's amazing. But I'm going to sign off now. Let's heal our minds, bodies, and souls together.
I would just like to leave with not a poem so much as it's kind of a limerick that my father wrote in his book. And it's about the critics. And then we all face critics.
Right.
And here's how it goes. He says, I hate the guys who criticize, minimize the other guys whose enterprise has made them